So, you're a new player to Overwatch. I've been playing Overwatch since 2016, since it's been released. So I'm doing this just solely based off of like my experience of playing the game, and I've been playing it for a long time. So this list is just what I think new players should play based on the type of hero that they are, and are they easier to play? Is it require a lot more knowledge and ideas and things and complications to play this hero or not? So let's get to it. First and foremost, I'm going to start with some of the more difficult heroes to play. And I'll tell you this is, if you're a new player and you want to get used to the game and learn how to play the game, my number one hero that I think is probably one of the hardest heroes to play in this game is Doomfist. He's just extremely hard, difficult hero to play. He has a high learning curve. Next up on DPS, I'm gonna go to Genji. Kind of similar playstyle. I think Genji is an extremely hard hero to learn, to master, to get good with, know what targets to dive. It's just all in all a difficult hero. I respect players who play both Doomfist and Genji and are really good at them, so no hate or shade to them. Moving on up to supports, probably one of the hardest supports to play, I would say, today, and get good at playing them would probably be either BAP or Ana. And me being an Ana player, I'm gonna put Ana here as being like the hardest support player hero to play. And yes, if you do learn her and learn her well, you learn a lot about the game. But Ana is extremely difficult, has a very high skill ceiling, and she's not easy to play because she has no get out of jail free cards, right? Except for like her nade that heals her a little bit, and her sleep, which is a skill shot that you have to hit, so you'd be good at aiming. And then she's based on basically aim, right? Aim and positioning, which is very hard for new players to get accustomed to. Moving on up to super easy heroes to play that new players can play. I would say from a tank's perspective, it would likely be, and don't get it twisted, I don't think these heroes are all like meta or whatever or not. I'm gonna say Orisa is probably one of the easiest heroes to play from a tank's perspective. A little bit of aiming required and positioning, but other than that, her skills are pretty straightforward, and she's not too hard mentally to grasp. From a DPS perspective, I'm going to put Soldier 76, who's one of my mains as well. I'm a hit scan main, right up there in S tier. It's more just a little bit of aiming and a little bit of positioning, but all in all, his skills, his abilities are very easy to learn, and it's not too crazy for somebody to, get a hold of how to play that hero. Going to supports, and Mercy lovers don't hate me here, but Mercy's arguably one of the easiest heroes to play in the game, and obviously it's very hard to climb with her, right? Because she's not really meta, and you really need a good DPS to play with. So I respect Mercy players who are, stick it out and keep playing her, but that's the reality behind it. Mercy is definitely one of the easier heroes to learn as a hero, and their abilities aren't all too complex, and it's not the hardest thing to play her. Now, tanks as well, right? I'm gonna go back to tanks as far as like, I think let's go to like moderate, like B tier, right? I think someone like D.Va is definitely B tier, and I'm gonna do two at a time and say Winston, right? They're not the hardest to grasp, but they're also not the easiest. I think they're right there moderately in the middle. They're dive heroes. They have abilities that, people often use them in the wrong way, where they may dive in and maybe use their matrix too much on D.Va, or use their bubble too soon in the wrong area, or dive the wrong targets and just get deleted and be like, what the heck is going on, right? But then there's the aspect of they're actually both really strong picks today in the meta, and if a new hero was to play them, they could do pretty well playing them, and their abilities as far as like their primary fire and their the abilities to jump in and the ability to like absorb damage through either a shield with Winston or a matrix with Diva. It's not the hardest thing to understand. It's more so of like you're playing dive. A dive hero is a little bit more complicated to understand and know who to dive and when to dive, and that positioning is just really paramount to doing well on both those heroes. So not hard per se, but definitely not easy to play. A support hero that I feel that is kind of like mid-tier as well, who's like not hard to play, but also not easy to play, and it's best for like a new person to play them. In a middle tier, I would probably say someone like Brig. Brig is not the easiest hero to learn, but also is not the hardest. And I would probably say the same for Lucio as well. Don't get me wrong, there's not a tier list as far as like who's the hardest to play, who's the easiest to play. I think more of sort of like new players to understand the concept of how to play this hero. Lucio can be played kind of effectively, just even if you want to, sticking around with your team, amping it up, healing your team, speed boosting your team. Obviously, if you want to get really good with both Birgit and Lucio, it's like every other hero. You have to really have high knowledge of the game, and I think it's more like a middle average kind of tier for a new player to pick this hero up. And Lucio was actually the first hero I ever played this game. And I was like the first season, and I was like high plat, low diamond when I first started playing in Overwatch 1 at the end of the first season. Well, it was the third season, end of the third season. Moving on to DPS, as far as like heroes that I feel like more of like middle of the pack, I'm gonna add Cassidy as one of them. Right, and I'll say that Cass is once again aim and positioning, but he's more of a mid-range hero, which differs then from Soldier 76. It's a little bit more harder to understand how to play Cass, to understand his abilities, when to use them, when not to, whereas soldiers are pretty like much more straightforward as a DPS hero. And I would say, like, you know, you want to pick him up as a new player, yeah, it's about average in the middle. Like, are you going to do as well as you would with Soldier if you're brand new? No. But are you going to do really poorly as if you picked up Genji? Probably not. And that's my mindset here. Another really kind of, and this is going to maybe stir up the pot a little bit, as far as like the best hero, I think, overall to play, if you're playing this game from a supports perspective, Zenyatta. And I'll tell you this, as far as like, this hero, yes, he may not be easy to play, but I think he's one of the best for a new player to play, because he will teach you every aspect of the game from a supports perspective, because he requires aiming, and he requires really good aiming. He requires really good positioning, and he has no get out of jail free cards, doesn't have any movement abilities besides just like his kick to kick somebody away. You have to really understand the concept of game. One, this will teach you everything about the game, and if you're up for the challenge, definitely play Zenyatta. Now the caveat here, like I said, the second thing too is, you know, it's not going to be easy. But this is your challenge here as a new player. Pick up Zen, get good with Zen. I think it will teach you and benefit you entirely as an Overwatch player to play Zenyatta. As far as another, like, this is like a different kind of perspective, but Moira definitely is a super like new user, new player friendly hero. And like I said, it's not going to teach you as much as like what playing Zen would be like, but Moira is like understanding her abilities and playing her, definitely much easier to play Moira. And that's hands down, it's not a hard hero to understand. And her abilities aren't all too crazy. Another like really hard hero from a tank's perspective is definitely Ball. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. He's not easy to play. He's kind of like Doomfist. It's like you can get countered by a lot of different things, and it'll be rough trying to play him and understand his abilities, what to do with them. And it's not something that I think a new player can pick up right off the bat. Some heroes that I think are kind of easy to play is definitely like Bastion. Like, once again, point and click, use your secondary fire, your grenade to shoot off and stick to something, and it's just like it's a projectile. His ultimate, you know, his tank form, it's not too hard to grasp from a concept, but you know, I don't think he's easier than Soldier 76, because he doesn't really have too much movement abilities going for him, besides like his grenade will bump him away, but that takes a little bit more concept to understand how to do those quote-unquote super jumps with Bastion. But it's not the hardest thing, but definitely something that is not also the easiest. Another hero I would say is not too hard to play is probably Torb. It's like, if you're new to the game and it's not too hard to play as a new player, right? You throw your turret down into a position, it starts shooting at something, and then you shoot your primary fire, your secondary fire, and you have your ability to, you know, do different things there, and you repair your turret. Like, it's something that, like, concept of the game is not too difficult for, I would say, for a new player to pick up. Some C tier DPS, I would definitely put like Junkrat. I would put like Sombra there as well, and I would probably arguably put Widowmaker. So Junkrat, you know, it's hard to hit your projectiles if you're new to the game, if you're not used to the way Overwatch plays. It's hard to do your combo to delete heroes, and then like, yeah, his ultimate's kind of easy, but then it's like, other than that, like, most of what he does, it's not the easiest for a new player to understand. Same thing goes for like a Sombra. Like, you go invisible, you go behind, like, what targets do I hack? I have to hack health packs. When do I jump into fight? When do I use my ultimate? Not the hardest hero to understand per se, but I definitely think from a new player's perspective, it may be a bit confusing. Widowmaker's another one. Like, yeah, she's a sniper. Yeah, she could be really strong at times, especially at higher elo, and a nuisance to deal with. But knowing how to play her, and just like, this isn't Call of Duty, and from a new player's perspective, to understand how to play a sniper like Widowmaker in this game. Same thing I would go with Hanzo. Like, any sniper's perspective in this game, I don't think it's the best approach for a new player to be playing either Hanzo or Widowmaker. I just think it's more difficult for them to understand and grasp it right off the bat, being new to Overwatch. Maga is definitely super easy, along with Hog, for new players to understand. Point and click, hook something, jump into something, you know, use my ultimate, shoot people away with Hog, or get this cage fight around folks. Like, the concept of these two heroes isn't necessarily all too difficult to grasp, and I think from a tank's perspective, these two heroes are definitely good for new players to pick up, to kind of get a hold of. Would I recommend playing those two? Maybe definitely not Maga, because I don't really like Maga's concept. Hog is kind of okay from my perspective, but that's not the purpose of this video. Moving on up to some hard heroes to grasp. I'm gonna put Tracer down in C tier, but I would almost put her in D tier, because, but I think she's a little bit easier to understand than Genji. But you know, Genji, I just feel like is one of the most difficult DPS heroes to play from a new player's perspective. But Tracer's a little bit, you know, higher up there as being slightly easier. I think Zarya is definitely not the hardest hero to understand from a new player's perspective. I think I just think like her abilities aren't all too complicated. More or less, she's not the easiest, because, you know, knowing when to grab something, knowing who to bubble, when to bubble, not to waste your bubble, how to get charge. I think that's what makes her a little bit harder than some of the other tanks in S tier for a new player to understand. Rein is definitely middle ground, right? I don't think he's easy, but I don't think he's hard to play either. It's, I press my secondary fire, I put my shield up, I swing my hammer around, I throw my fire strike, I ultimate, I use my ultimate, I earth shatter, I charge in. So it's like, his abilities are pretty straightforward. The hard thing about Rein is, you know, managing your shield health, when to ult, when not to ult, you know, using your fire strike effectively, baiting out things with your shield, and interchanging between using your shield and your primary fire, swinging your hammer. These things are kind of like makes him a little bit harder. I don't think he's easy to play for a new player, but I don't think he's the hardest. And I do respect people to play Rein. You know, This would, you know what? I'm putting him in S. You know why? Just like with Zen, I changed my mind. Just like with Zen, he will teach you the game for honor and glory. Reinhardt, hands down, will teach you how to play the game as a tank. That's it. That's it. Respect it or not, I respect it. So yeah. Reaper's B tier, Pharah's B tier. I don't think they're the hardest to play. It's like aiming, shooting around, movement abilities, but then like knowing when to use your abilities, knowing when to ult. You can be very vulnerable when you ult on both of these heroes. So that they're not the easiest, but also not the hardest. I think Lifeweaver is definitely A tier. Super good for a new player to play, but also not the hardest for a new player to pick up. I would say the same for Juno. Her abilities are pretty straightforward. Like Lifeweaver's definitely much more effective, and I think Juno's like hard meta right now in my opinion. And I think it requires more skill than Lifeweaver to play Juno and play her effectively. But I think like from a new player, like picking up the game, Juno is really fun. She can teach you a lot about the game, but also like, not also the easiest compared to like maybe Mercy Mora's perspective to like learn. It's getting harder. We have limited heroes here. It's not the easiest thing to go down this list and do it. I think Ramatra is C tier as far as like new players perspective. I personally still find it difficult with all my years experience of playing Overwatch to play Ramatra. I know he's not the oldest hero, but he's also not the newest, but he's fairly new to me from playing the game. But I feel like he's kind of difficult to play and master. People may disagree with me there. I think Sig falls in the middle of the pack, originally like how I was thinking about with Ryan, but I'm going to keep him here because I think Ryan truly, like OG tank, will teach you the game. Sig, will teach you the game too, but a little bit more difficult to understand his abilities. Shield, managing your flux, when to use your rock and on who, stuff like that. BAP is probably C tier to pick up. Not as hard to understand as Ana, but still very difficult to understand how to play BAP effectively. And people are gonna probably crucify me in the comments with this, but I think Kiri is not good for new players. Kiri's very strong and has been very strong for a very long time since her release, but being good with Kiri and understanding Kiri, when to use her abilities, how to use her abilities, being that she's so strong and has such a high impact on the game, that if you play her incorrectly, you can really mess up your game experience, and it could turn you off from playing Overwatch because it's like, boom or bust here. And I'm personally, this is my hot take. I'm putting Kiri as like one of the worst heroes for a new player to pick up and try to understand and play the game from that perspective. I'm gonna put Sim kind of like in Junkrat's perspective, like another one, how to understand how to use Sim. Her abilities are pretty easy to use, but the way to use her abilities is what makes her hard to play, and hard to understand from a new player's point of view. Like, what am I doing here? What am I doing with my teleport? What am I doing with my turrets? What am I doing with my ultimate? And that's what kind of makes her difficult to understand. Venture, I think, is pretty straightforward. She is kind of like a dive hero from my perspective, because she has abilities to go in. But she's kind of like a hybrid hero, not just dive, but like a little bit close, slightly, I would say close range with her, but not completely 100% dive, but mostly dive. But I don't think they're the hardest hero to pick up. I think they are, they're pretty easy from a DPS perspective, but not the hardest. I'm gonna put Illari around B tier in the middle. Pylon placement, her abilities aren't all too hard to understand from a new player, but really to be effective and play her well, that would be difficult for a new player to understand. Sojourn is probably in the same boat there. They do have movement abilities like Soldier, but I think a little bit, you know, I'm putting her in A tier. Put her in A tier. Not the hardest, but not the easiest. Ashe is definitely probably more B tier. The aiming perspective, kind of like Widowmaker and Hanzo. She's not a sniper, but similar to a sniper in the way that she plays. And her abilities are just a little bit harder, like her ability to use her, throw her explosive out, when to shoot it, how to use it, when to use Bob, her displacement ability to knock back things or to get to, you know, different points, vantage points. This makes her a little bit more difficult to play. I see a lot of people do poorly on this hero, and you will argue me and say, well, they're not the hardest hero to play. Mei. I think a lot of people do poorly on Mei with, you know, how to use her abilities, walling off folks, when to, you know, swap off of her. I think from a new player's perspective, their point of view, you know, what am I doing here? What's this cryo freeze? What's this this ice wall that I'm putting up? My ultimate, when do I pop it? Like, how am I using my ultimate to be most effective? I think that would be difficult for people picking Mei. And I kind of think the same, and I'm gonna put Echo in D tier. You know, people don't understand how strong Echo is, but her mobility, her ability to get up into the air, her ability to dive onto heroes, her ability to you know, just have so much mobility and do so much damage, and her ultimate to clone, who to clone, what to clone into, right, during certain fights. I think this just adds a lot of complexity into the concept of the game, and from a new hero's point of view, Overwatch is already a big cluster of things going on. This just adds to that. And Junker Queen's another one, because I think people will struggle playing her, and I'm gonna put her in high C tier, almost B tier, as far as like from a new hero's perspective, a new player's perspective, a new player's point of view. I think she's not the hardest, but she's also not all too easy to play. Well, take this all with a grain of salt. This is my tier list as far as what I think new players should play, as far as like what's more comfortable, what can teach them more in the game, what would be easier for them to pick up skill wise. You let me know in the comments below what you agree and disagree with. This is, like I said, my opinion only. Take it as a grain of salt, and as always, happy gaming.